Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just sort of start going over the handout that I made. I'm also going to, I should have done this before I started sharing. I'm going to put on original sound. Okay. So I've been thinking about this, and I think that, in the 2 hours that I imagine this taking right now, I'm not going to turn you all into experts. I don't think that's going to happen. There's also a bunch of things that I think that actually are handled really well by a lot of the video tutorials, especially the. I'm going to go ahead and click on. Oh, it didn't work. Blog. Okay. Blog.dorico.com resources. This is a resource that's put out by Steinberg that has a whole bunch of really useful stuff on it. All this stuff here is aimed at getting people started. All these things, some of these go into a little bit more in-depth topics, but they're also great things for checking out. There's this, learn Dorico in 11 minutes. That's fine, but what I would really recommend is carving out a few hours and going through the first steps guide, which is written by the woman who wrote all of their documentation. Her name's Lily Harris, and she's put together a whole, I think that like if you download the PDF version, it's like 100 pages, but there is an online version that just sort of walks you through process by process. And I would really recommend taking a few hours and sort of walking through that first. So what am I doing tonight? What I'm trying to do tonight is show you these are the things that like were a little bit trickier for me to get my head around coming from Finale, and that I've also seen some of my students that I've taught to use Dorico struggle with as well. But these resources are there for some of those basics. I'm sure I will also go over some basics tonight, but these are going to go into more depth. Other resources are scoring notes. This is, if you're not familiar with this is what used to be known as the Sibelius blog when it was run by Daniel Spreadbury. That's a name you'll hear again if you aren't already familiar with it. And when Daniel left, when Daniel was fired along with the rest of the Sibelius development team in 2012, he bequeathed this website to Philip Rothman, who is a New York City-based engraver who also has a great podcast about notation software. And so the Sibelius blog became Scoring Notes, and it has articles, news, and tips on. I was about to say all three. That's still true. They still have stuff about Finale in it, but we'll see going forward what happens there. Oh yeah, Notation Central. Notation Central is sort of related to Scoring Notes in that it is also run by Philip. And this is where, if you are so interested, like Karen, was it you? It was a Karen who asked about Notation Express. Was that you?
That was me, and I haven't looked at it. I just saw it. There's all these Facebook groups now that are like,
Yeah.
Dorico for Finale
Yeah.
uh, users. Yeah, and
Yeah.
somebody mentioned that they found it very helpful, but
It is very helpful, but what I wrote on the spreadsheet for you is it is very helpful, but I think that there's still a lot of merit in learning how the program works first and getting fairly comfortable on it, and then you can invest a few more bucks into one of these things and make it move even faster. But I think this will make more sense if you already know the program. So this is, for example, if you guys don't already know, this is an example of the Stream Deck XL. This is a 32 key model. They have 15 key models. And these are sort of software-based buttons that let you do all sorts of actions. And you can purchase one of those separately, and then purchase, here is an example. Here is the Stream Deck XL setup for Dorico. And it's just sort of pages of buttons that will let you access all sorts of things. It is, though, another $40 plus the cost of the hardware. I don't know if I'd recommend this right out of the gate. I would say later on, look at those. So I'm going to go over some tips for converting your Finale files first. If you have not purchased your Dorico Crossgrade, when you do, you should also be getting access to Finale 27. So you can update to the latest version of Finale, and the good thing about that is that also gives you access to Music XML, whatever it is, 4.1 or something like that. So you have the latest version of Music XML, which is going to provide greater compatibility. In Finale, I'm going to have both of these things open. In Finale, and I'm doing this on my Windows computer. It's basically the same on the Macintosh, but under File Export, there is this Music XML Preferences. And this is where you can tell it, first of all, it looks like it's 4.0, to tell it what version of Music XML you want to use. If you use the compressed format, so this option down here exports the compressed MXL format. If you use that, you can also include your linked parts as part of the file. And according to Michael Good is the guy who created Music XML. He retired a few years ago, but he's still fairly active online. And he mentioned also that this compressed format also will include embedded graphics, including anything that you have made in the shape designer. I haven't really tested that out, but his recommendation was definitely to use the compressed format. The other thing to be aware of right here is that at the very bottom it says include subfolders, and that's great because then when you go up here and you go export, there's an option to translate folder, and then you can just go to whatever it is that you want to be converting. Go as far up the folder as you can. You can essentially do, I think, one hard drive at a time, but it will go through every single folder and look for any .mus or .musx file that there is and convert them. That's in theory. In practice, what I found is that, first of all, it is a fairly lengthy process. It's not instantaneous. And depending on how old the files you have are, it may run into some problems. It might run into problems where it doesn't, it can't read something and it needs confirmation on something like this. So you can't necessarily just totally walk away and forget about it. However, I set this up the other day, and sort of over the course of working on other stuff throughout the day, I got, something like 12,000 files converted. I hate to think about how many of those are like old, Schenker homework assignments where I tortured Finale into doing a Schenkerian graph. Then I certainly don't need a Music XML version of that, but there you go. The other thing that I would really strongly recommend, and I didn't write this down, but this is the sort of wisdom that everybody else is sharing, and I think that it really is true, is anything you really want to keep, also save it as a PDF. Because if you open up that music XML file in 10 years, 20 years, something like that, and something is somehow broken, you're going to want the reference to know how it is broken. John was kind enough to share a file with me, and I played with the conversion today. And if we get time, I'll show you some of the things that I found. But it was surprising how many things transferred, and then there were a few surprises for me. There was like one place where John had one extra quarter note in a measure and had missed it. And somehow that threw everything off. There was another place where there were, and I told him about this already today, there was a place where there was a half note and a quarter note as part of a triplet. But rather than being defined as 3 quarter notes in the space of 2 quarter notes, it was defined as being 3 half notes in the space of 2 half notes. But there was only room in the measure for 1 more half note. It looked fine on the page, it printed out fine, and it caused havoc in the translation. And without being able to look at the file in Finale, I don't think I would have necessarily been able to figure out what was going on.
And Jake, can I mention to everybody what you and I talked about? One thing that I have in my checklist for proofing is to, and this is in Finale, but just to use that check regions for durations function. Right, and it check measures for durations, because if you go through it, it will tell you when you have that. So I had become overly confident that I was getting it right, but I didn't happen to see this 1 quarter rest that was pushed into the next measure, at least the way Jake described it. It was kind of obscured by the new time signature. So this is a good reason to use that sort of thing. And I assume, Jake, it would also have caught the triplet problem, because it did look fine. As you said, it looked fine.
It looked fine
in the file, but it was wrong in the tuplet dialog.
Yeah. Another piece of advice is that, like, I would really strongly suggest, and this I've seen this piece of advice handed out also a lot on Facebook over the last week, which is get to learn Dorico. Don't make converting a music XML file your first project. You're going to see some weird stuff. Get to know the program first. And then once you feel comfortable with it, then start converting your stuff. Do it in your spare time, whatever, But I don't think that diving into reformatting something, especially something large scale, is the way to go. When you do feel like you are ready to give it a try, you should be aware that, so here I am in Dorico, and one of the options down here is to open or import a file. Oh, before I do that though, what I really wanted to show you, I'm going to open up the preferences. I'm going to make the assumption that most of you are Mac users. Is that a safe assumption? Do we have any Windows people? Karen, you're a Windows. Okay, we have a couple Windows people. I'm going to go ahead and I'll say both then. So opening up preferences on Mac, it's Command, comma, just like pretty much every other Mac program. On PC, it's Control, comma. And one of the options here under preferences, these are program preferences, is Music XML import. And there are a lot of options here. You may find that you get better results by unchecking these. These things are the things that Dorico is going to try to preserve. And it may seem at first that you want it to try to preserve everything, but as soon as you do that, it's starting to override its own defaults. So rather than do that, I would suggest that you again learn how the program works, learn how to make the settings that you want to make it look the way you want to work, and then try unchecking a lot of these things. See how it goes, and then if it's not quite to your liking, you could always try it again with more of these things checked. But unchecking a lot of these options lets Dorico work with the raw material a little bit better and use its own engraving engine to solve problems. And leaving those checked is sort of telling it to ignore its own better instincts. So I think that it's one of those things where it's worth experimentation either way. All right, now let's actually take a look at Dorico itself. So we will go into some Dorico basics. This is the Steinberg hub. I'm going to go ahead and just create a new file. I'm going to create an empty score. I have some options. When I first started learning Dorico, so back in I think from version 1 up through like version 4, when you would open up a new file, there wasn't any of this option over here, and it would just open up, and it didn't have a meter, it didn't have a key signature, it didn't have anything. Now you can specify that stuff ahead of time, but a little bit later I'll show you that Dorico doesn't really care about meter. Meter is secondary to other considerations. That's sort of a weird concept for Finale users to get used to, but it's the truth. You can choose an initial page size, an initial rastral size, which this is how large your staff is. You can choose your music font. I could talk for all 2 hours about music fonts. They're totally fun. But Dorico uses what's called the standard music font layout that's actually developed by Daniel Spreadbury for Dorico, but it is an open standard. And so, those of you who upgraded Finale to version 27, the big thing that they added there was Smoofle font support. It's actually, since version 5, Dorico is actually shipped with all of Finale's fonts, since pretty much all of the Smoofle fonts that are out there, well, that's not quite true. Many of the Smoofle fonts that are out there are actually released under the open font license, so they are free to distribute, free to modify. So Dorico ships not only with its own fonts, but all of Finale's fonts, and also Leland, which is the font that was developed for MuseScore by Martin Curie, based on the glyphs used in Score, if you ever used that for engraving. So you get to specify your music font. Bravura is the default font that ships with Dorico. These are all the other Smoofle fonts on my system. You can see here are all the Finale fonts. Finale Ash, Broadway, Engraver, Jazz, Maestro, all those things. I'm just going to leave these at the defaults. I'm also going to leave my main text font as Academico. Academico is also included with Dorico. It's a serif font based on New Century Schoolbook that was developed again by Daniel Spreadbury for Dorico. I'm going to leave these alone, number of bars, key signature, time signature, and I'm going to say create project. Okay, over here, these are the 5 modes of Dorico. Dorico doesn't really use tools in the same way that Finale does, but it does use different modes for different things. So we have setup, write, engrave, play, and print. This sort of more or less might follow the way that your project might work. You start a project and the first thing you do is figure out, well, who do I want playing this piece of music? How many different movements are there? That is all handled under setup. Once you're done with setup, then you can go write your piece of music. Once you're done writing your piece of music, then you can get into the more hardcore graphical stuff, like, oh, I just want to nudge that over a little bit. That's where engrave mode comes in. Engrave mode is also where you deal with layout stuff for your pages and stuff. The play, this is where, well, there's nothing to see yet, but this actually presents sort of a piano roll view of your music, kind of like a DAW. And you can edit a lot of playback features that are usually much. I've like in Finale they were impossible to edit, but you can do a lot of editing here in the play if you are the play mode if you are interested in playback. And then print is where you go. I mean, there's nothing to print yet. This is all it says so far. Tacit. But this is where you would print out. You can choose whether you're actually going to print to a printer. If you select graphics, then you can choose to print to PDF, mono or color, that good stuff. Okay, let's go back though to setup. Here's the other thing that you should understand about Dorico, and this is a concept that they really got. It shares this with Cubase, if you've ever used Cubase. You have your sort of main work area here in the middle, and then you have a left zone and a lower zone and a right zone. I can toggle these on and off using Command on a Mac, Control on a PC. 7 for toggling the left panel on and off, 8 for the bottom panel, and 9 for the right panel. And then 0 toggles all panels on and off. Here under Setup, on the left panel, these are your players. And so here's a major conceptual difference between Dorico and Finale. Finale and Sibelius are very concerned about staves. And then during that, on that staff, you can maybe have an instrument change, but really it's just, you set up number of staves, essentially is what's going on. In Dorico, you set up players. So you need to think of it as who's actually going to be playing, who is going to be given a part and have that set in front of them. And from there, you can say, well, my flute player is also going to play the piccolo, so I can also assign a piccolo to this player. But it's not the staff, it's the player. There are two different kinds of players. There is a single player. Our flute player would be a good example. And then there are section players. That's relevant to us as choral musicians because a section of sopranos is also a section, okay? But this would also be typically where you'd put your strings. So everything, your flutes, oboes, clarinets, all your brass and stuff, those tend to be single players, and then you have your sections. What's the real difference? There are a few things that single players can do that section players can't. I said a few. There's really only one that I can think of. They can switch instruments. You can have your flute player switch to a piccolo and back to a flute. You would never ask a viola section to switch to piccolo and then back to viola. Okay? So single players can change instruments, can have multiple instruments assigned to them. Section players cannot. However, section players can be told to go into divisi. And what that will do is we'll actually split the staff into two. And I'll show you some cool ramifications of this later on. And you can have an independent staff for that second part and then restore unison. And it takes care automatically in the parts of breaking out into separate staves if it needs to. You can't do that, though, on a single player. So let's go ahead and add, I'm going to add a single player. I can do that. I can also do it. I'll go ahead and do what I was saying. I'll assign a flute to it. Now we can actually start seeing stuff show up here.
Hey, Jake, how would you
Yes.
like to handle questions if they come up?
Oh,
or you want just to note them, or
You know what? That's a great question. That right there is a good question. I think right now, since that's our first question, if you have questions, go ahead and shout out. I can't really see everybody, so if you raise your hand, that's not necessarily going to help me. So,
mind if we just unmute and speak?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So in Finale,
Yep.
at least the way that I learned to do it, if you've got, say you've got, 2 staves or soprano 1, soprano 2 for part of the piece, and then they're singing all on one staff later. You have to create 3 staves.
Yep. You do not have to do that for Dorico.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. My little central window with the nice pretty buttons is gone, but I can still add players down here. By the way, Shift P is how you add new players. Let's add a second flute player, and let's also say that that second flute player is going to have. So I'm going to assign another instrument to this player by Shift I. I can also do this little plus button. Piccolo. Now it says flute 2 and piccolo. You might notice here though that it just says flute 1 and flute 2. So where's the piccolo? I'll show you later where the piccolo is. Let's add, since we're interested in writing choral music, let's add some vocal sections. We're going to do this with the section players. I can also do that. I think that it's Shift Option or Alt P. Yes. So now you can see these are single players because the little icon has one person, and these are groups of players because there are 2 people. So let's go ahead and say soprano. I'm going to go ahead and add a couple soprano sections, although this is not always the way I would recommend. There are some cool tricks with the Divisi thing that I might often use. I'm gonna do it this way for now, though. Especially since this will show you that it automatically numbers it like you might want. Let's go ahead and add some altos and call it good. Now, so that's the left-hand side. The right-hand side shows layouts. This is the equivalent of parts in Finale. There are 3 different types of layouts. There is a full score. There are parts. And so the full score, that's the conductor icon. The parts have a little music stand icon. There's also, what's it called? Custom score. Have I used custom scores? Yes, I have, but I mean, you can do a lot of this stuff without necessarily resorting to using that third type. So this is the equivalent right now of having a score and these 5 parts.
Hey Jake, quick question.
Yeah.
Does this mean that as you're working, the parts are actually just being created and you don't have to extract parts?
They're there. They're there. If I go up here to this little plus, let's go ahead and look at our flute part. That's the flute part.
I'm in.
I actually said, yeah. There's the flute 2 part. Nothing in it yet. I'm going to go back here to the full score though. You can remove a part from a layout. So all these things are tied together. The left panel is tied to the right panel and the bottom panel. The bottom panel is tied to these other things. Let me give you an example of that. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and just write in. So we know that there's actually some music here, okay? However, I'm going to go to this full score and I'm going to go uncheck flute 1. I haven't deleted it. Matter of fact, if I go to the part, it's still there. I just removed it from being assigned to the score. Let's talk about flows. This is a term, as I understand it, that is sort of borrowed from the publishing industry. Here's a great way of thinking about it. You've all seen textbooks, maybe like a science textbook or a history textbook, and there's the main body of text. Magazines do this too. And then there might be a little insert, and this, top half of the page is just a little short little thing about, well, this is what was going on in this other part during the American Revolution. Just a little, little side thing. And it's an independent set of text. That will be a different flow. In Dorico, you can use flows for all sorts of things. One of the most obvious things would be if you have a piece of music that has multiple movements, each one of those movements can go in a different flow. If you're doing a set of songs, each song should be a different flow. If you're doing cues for a film, maybe each cue gets its own flow. Is this making sense? It's definitely a new concept, and yeah.
Yes. Yeah. A quick question.
Yes.
Right now, if I have multi-movement piece, I usually create each movement in a separate finale file.
Yep.
And then I, generate PDFs, and then I just combine the PDFs. Am I understanding that that's no longer necessary with this?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You still might find it desirable to do that way, but it is not required. And there can be some real advantages to using this multiple flow approach. Especially if, let's say, you have the option in your page layout stuff to be using either flow page numbers or entire part page numbers. So let's say you chop out half your first movement, enough so that it affects the number of pages in the score or the part. You don't have to worry about that stuff. It's all in the same document, and it just will go from page to page.
I just fell deeper in love.
Yeah, it's great stuff. So that is flows. Let me go ahead and add a new flow. Boom. We can go ahead. Well, it's already called flow 1, flow 2. Let me go add one more in here. I'm going to now zoom over until I find. Okay, you can't really tell, but this is the start of my second flow. And this is the start of my third flow. I'm going to make one little setting here, one change here, so that we can see that a little bit better. It's actually appropriate for me to bring this up now anyway. Is it? I'm going to do it anyway. There are I showed you the program preferences. In addition to that, there are 3 sets of options that you can go into. Notation options, engraving options, and layout options. It took me a long time to figure out what the difference was. And I got to tell you that I'm still not perfect at it. My instincts about which place to go are better than they used to be, but this is one of those things where I wish that somebody had done this for me when I first started. Okay, so let me go over really quick what those differences are and show you also how to call up those options. On Mac, it's Shift-Command-N for notations, Control-Shift-N on PC. So here are the notation options. Notation options are going to be like different ways of actually writing your music. Dorico was developed, it was actually here's the super short history if you aren't aware of it. In 2012, Avid decided to shut Sibelius down, and they fired the entire Sibelius development team. There was a huge outcry. Avid backtracked and hired a new development team, and Sibelius is still going strong. Meanwhile, Steinberg came in and went to Daniel Spreadbury, who I mentioned before, who was the head of Sibelius development, and said, "We're creating a new notation program and we want you to write it." He said, "Fantastic, hire my whole team." And they said, "Great, let's do it." So Steinberg hired, I don't know if it's all of them, but hired the team that had been developing Sibelius for years, And they set out sort of from square one. If we're going to start from square, let's take all the lessons we learned from working on Sibelius and do a new program. So that's what Dorico is. 2012 is, I'm pretty sure that's when this came out. Just going to check my facts. Copyright 2011, close enough. Behind Bars by Elaine Gould. This is the standard reference for notation for the past 12 years now. So this came out right before, you've got it right next to your desk too, John, very good. This came out right before Daniel and that team started working on Dorico, and as you'll see in these options, it actually looks very much like Elaine Gould's book. That is not at all by accident. That was a very deliberate choice. So you can always see how, demonstrations of how each thing is going to look. And it's very much, it was written with that as a constant reference for them going back to. So this, for example, I'm here in notations. This is your options for how you're going to display accidentals. Okay? This is how you're going to display cautionary accidentals. All sorts of options here about how to actually write the music. Engraving options. So the way you get at all the options things is with either that Command Shift on Mac or Control Shift on Windows. N for notation options, E for engraving options. So before we were looking at how you're going to write the accidentals. This is now going to affect how they are going to look. Here you're going to affect things like the minimum gap between accidentals that are going to appear vertically. Just sort of all sorts of options about how things are drawn. So notation options is how they're written. Engraving options is how they're drawn. And then there's the third set of options that I was about to head to, and I don't even remember why. Now I do, which is layout options. So that's Command Shift L. And layout options is everything that might change from layout to layout. And you'll notice that over here on the right, I can choose which layouts, the changes that I'm going to make, it's going to affect. So this is things including things like page size. So if I want to turn this into, where is it? There it is, all the way here at the bottom. Tabloid size, boom. Now I've got a tabloid size score. I want to make it A4. There we go. Now it's going to be A4. Let's put it back to letter. This is where I can change that rastral size. So, 7 millimeters, that's a little bit small for parts. 7.4, that's better. So I could, if I'm making orchestral parts, I might want to go up to 7.4. I might even want to go as much as the size 1. And if I'm not happy with these preset things, I can also change the size of a space. And you can see all this stuff happening in real time as I do that. I'm going to go ahead and put this back on 7 millimeter staves.
So, quick question about that.
Yes.
So, I attended a seminar that Bill Holub did, the Uber copyist engraver, and he handed out some standards for this kind of thing. Is there a source, is it in behind bars?
Yeah.
Okay, so we could look it up in behind bars.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly
just so
where
that we
it is.
maintain some sort of standard with the basic publishing and engraving industry.
Yeah, I mean, but she definitely has guidelines over, what the different rastral sizes are used for. There's another good resource for that. Hold on, I'm going to turn on my... I'll be right back. Okay. So this is Music Engraving Today, The Art and Practice of Digital Note Setting by Stephen Powell, which has really great stuff on engraving in general. It is very... It's for both Finale and Sibelius. It's now starting to feel a little extinct. But this is here it is. I mean, it has this whole table. I don't know if you can see that on the different raster sizes and what their typical uses are. The other thing that I would suggest checking out is MOLA, the Major Orchestra Librarians Association. Are you familiar with their document about part preparation? Okay. MOLA part preparation. There we go. So they put this out, I don't know exactly when, but yeah, this has all sorts of stuff on score setup, part setup. That's, they talk about, 7 millimeters is fine for woodwind players because woodwind players are sitting somewhat closer to their stands. It's a little bit harder for string players because string players have to share their stand. They're typically sitting a little bit farther away. So 7 millimeters is a little bit too small for a general size. Let's move to something else though, okay?
What was that called again, Jake? What was that called?
The MOLA, Major Orchestra Librarians Association. I'll make a note and I can send this out later as well. What I came here to do was go to the options for flows, and it looks like, it's not showing me my flow headings. Now I'm going to say, instead of never, for all flows, and I'm going to apply it, and I'm going to go back to my main window. The reason I did that is because now you can see the actual flow headings. So it's now showing me here's flow 1. There's flow 2. There's flow 3. Remember when I said all these things are linked? If I go here to flute 2, you can see flute 2 is assigned to all 3 flows. Let's take flute 2 out of flow 2. And we can see right here in flow 2, now there's no flute 2. Let's do the same process, but do it a different way. If I click here on flow 3, it shows me that all the instruments are assigned to it. Let's uncheck flute 2, and now we have no flute 2 in flow 3. So it's the same thing, I just got there from a different way. Let's, just for fun, say now that flow 3 is not going to be part of the full score. It doesn't show up now in the score at all, but if I go to that part again, well, I can still see, it's not showing the flow headings again, but this is my flow 1, this is flow 2, and this is flow 3. It's still there, it's just not assigned to the full score layout. Is that making sense? That's definitely something that throws my students off. And it's definitely a different way of thinking about things than in Finale. I'm going to reset these things now. Okay, are we feeling okay about setup mode? Shall I go to write mode? Okay. So, I sort of hinted at this before. I know this was definitely a topic that a lot of people wanted to talk about, which is speedy entry. Is anybody here a simple entry user? Not a one. Amazing. Okay.
I'll say this: the only thing I use simple entry for is that pitch up and down tool.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I will use.
Do you ever
that.
use repitch?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Repitch can be a really useful tool in Finale. There is a very similar thing in Dorico that actually works even better, so I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, I too am a speedy entry fan. Like I said, I wasn't, even though I bought Dorico version 1, I think I even did a whole arrangement in Dorico 1 or 2, and it was just painful because I just felt, choosing the duration first is like hand behind my back. It's just so backwards to me. So with version 3.5, you can set it to allow pitch before duration. You can even set it, I will show you in my preferences, under note input and editing. I set that up to be the default. The other thing that I set, this says specify accidental rhythm dot and articulations after inputting the note. So if you're going along in speedy entry and Finale and you're going blah, 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 okay, I'm going to hit 5 for my quarter note. Oh, I'm going to make it dotted, so I hit the dot. If you don't do this, that doesn't work that way. So I set it up to do the dot after inputting the note. And by default, pitch before duration. The other thing, though, is, and this is an important thing to know, again, I'm back in the keyboard, in the preferences. Under key commands, I can reassign my keystrokes within the program to whatever I want. So there are a couple things that I do here that are also useful for speedy entry. Let me show you what they are. One is, and I can search for, I can search for what I'm looking for. Here, search for dot, and what I'm looking for is note input, dotted notes. And I think that by default it is the main period key, but not necessarily the decimal point key on your number pad, which is what I'm used to from speedy entry. So that's what this is. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and delete it. How do I delete it? Oh yeah, remove key command. I'm going to go ahead and add it again. So say press shortcut, I hit the number pad period, and then I hit add key command, and now it's going to work. The other thing that I add, and I'm going to show you this and then say I often don't use it, but it's nice that it's there. That under note input rests, I added 0 to that. I'll show you what that means in a moment, but I added that. Okay. The way you start adding notes in Dorico is you go somewhere where you want to start adding them, and then you hit Shift N, and that Shift plus something else is used for all sorts of entry. It's how you're going to enter text. That's going to be Shift X. Dynamics, Shift D. Playing techniques, that's Shift P. Tempo, Shift T. Clef, Shift C. So Shift plus all these other things is going to it's going to be how you largely interact with the program. So I'm going to input notes. So that's going to be Shift N for notes. When I do that, there are a couple things that I want you to notice. So in orange here, first of all, I want you to notice these sort of hash marks along the top. That is the rhythmic grid. The rhythmic grid, I also want you to draw your attention down here to the left. It's showing 8th notes. Do y'all see that? I don't know what size screen you're looking at. It could be minuscule for you, but it's down in the lower left. That shows the current value of the rhythmic grid. So that's set to 8th notes. I can change that by hitting Option, Alt on Windows, plus the square bracket keys. So I just changed this to be 16th notes, and now you can see that there are 4 hash marks per larger hash mark. That's 16th notes. Let's go the other direction. Back to eighth notes, quarter notes. With what the rhythmic grid does, it does a bunch of things. For example, if I use the arrow keys, hello. Oh, that's weird. That's weird. There we go. I'm moving around by the durations assigned to the rhythmic grid. I'm setting this back to eighth notes. Now, just like in speedy entry, I can play a note. Can y'all hear the flute, by the way? Great. And you're going to see the note that I'm playing too. So I'm playing a C, and now here is something that's different. The number pad layout is different. I'm sorry. You can, I think, reprogram it using these key commands. I would recommend you not, and just deal with the cognitive dissonance that's going to, be there for a little while. But I think that there are reasons that they laid it out the way that they did, and I understand from talking to other users that changing these settings can cause problems in other ways. So just get used to it. Rather than 5 being a quarter note, now 6 is a quarter note. The longest note you can enter is a brave, so that's going to be 9. That's your longest duration. Okay? So if I hit 6, there's a quarter note. 5 is going to be eighth note. And then 4 is going to be 16th notes. It's very much like speedy entry. How do I do rests? Most of the time what I do is, remember what I showed you about the rhythmic grid and the left and right arrow keys? Normally what I just do is that. I just advance to the next place that I want a note to start. If you want to explicitly move it by certain rhythmic values, you can do that. That is why I programmed that 0 key to be rests. So there's kind of an extra step. In Finale, if I just stop playing, that counts as no note, and now I can just enter rests. If I start entering notes right now, I've set it to this G, and now it's going to be entering Gs. Even though I'm not playing it, it's entering the Gs. If I want it to enter rests, I have to explicitly tell it to enter rests now with 0. So you can see here, 0 is turning on and off this little rest thing. So now if I hit something like 7, 7 is going to be my half note. I have now, you can see in orange, zoom in here, that it has added a half rest, and it's advanced the caret to this beat 3. So now I can add those notes. So hitting 0, if you set that up, and now I can enter in rests like I want. Let me say this though. So I said enter rests. Let's do this. I'm going to add in a half rest. What did it do? It didn't add a half rest. It added a quarter rest. And then this here, and now let's put in another quarter note. So this is another thing that you need to get used to. This happens with notes as well. Let me show you an example of that. This is a different weird concept. I'm going here to beat 4 in my flute 2, and I'm going to add a whole note. Now, what would happen in Finale? it would complain, right? It would say, I can't fit that whole note in. And depending on my settings, it might not say anything. Or it might say, I can't fit that whole note. What do you want to do? Do you want to get rid of the extra notes? Dorico doesn't care. I'm going to add a whole note. Here I go. So it's kind of weird. You kind of get used to it though. Like, let's say I'm going along and now I want to have an eighth note that ties to a quarter note. I can do that. You can do ties with T. So I could do eighth note and then hit T. You can see over here that has started the tie. And then I can add a quarter note. That's exactly what I said. However, what I've started doing is I've started spotting those things ahead of time, and rather than doing what I just did, it's a slightly fewer keystrokes. What was the entire duration? It's a dotted quarter. So 6, that's a dotted quarter. So that's how I've started entering it. Now I should say also, there is a let me try it before I say this. Yeah, there's a slick feature that if you aren't using pitch before duration, you can do, which is if you double tap a duration, it makes it dotted. That doesn't work for us speedy entry people. By the way, you can always turn off that pitch before duration using K. So that's what this button over here is. So I have it set to be that way by default. But if I turn it off, now let me hit, if I hit 5, that takes me to eighth note. But if I hit 5, 5, it's eighth note, and it also loaded up the dot. This is another, by the way, I just looked up here and saw the changes that I made. This is an important thing also, is that in the way it treats things like durations, Dorico is more Sibelius-like than Finale. Here's what I mean. In Finale, if we were to go to this note, this first note, and change it to a whole note, what's going to happen? Well, if we're in speedy entry, it's going to move all the other stuff over, and then it's going to complain and say, what do you want me to do with this? In both Sibelius and Dorico, if I change that to a whole note, here's what happens. Now it's a whole note, and all my other music is gone. It's just something to be careful of, so you don't want to accidentally like grab a bunch of stuff and then say, quarter note. I just lost a whole bunch of information. So just be careful. Have that ever actually happened to me? No, not really, but it's something to be aware of. Be even worse to hit 9.
There is insert mode, which will shift everything over.
That is true, yeah, and I have to admit that I have not used... There are a bunch of cool things with insert mode that I haven't totally explored. So insert mode, I can turn it on off and on with my insert key. I think that it's on Mac, isn't it? Is it Command I, Eric?
It's just I.
Just I.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, this lets me... Oh, let's put pitch before duration again. And you can see that like it's changing weird stuff sort of all over the time. The other thing with insert mode is you can like define like just up to a certain point for that to work or not. Yeah, I have to admit that I have not really put insert mode through its paces. I should learn how to do that. Once the notes are in, let's do something like, let's add some dynamics. Let's add dynamics over this whole passage. So Shift plus D for dynamics. let's say it starts pianissimo, and then it crescendos to, I don't know, a mezzo forte. And then it diminuendos, but only to a mezzo piano this time. Boom. There we go. It put the mezzo piano here. That's one thing you sort of have to get used to. It typically will assign a dynamic to the next starting point. There are a couple different ways that I could have done this. One way is to just do like a bar at a time. So I'm typing pianissimo and then that for a crescendo. And then right here, I might take this whole bar and do fortissimo, diminuendo. Either way works. This gives a little bit more precision about where you want those things to go.
What if you want to do that kind of a hairpin in just one bar?
What do you mean?
Well, you want to have a crescendo up to beat 3 and then decrescendo down to the end of it.
Okay, yeah. So like up to beat 3. And by the way, now rather than doing Shift D for dynamics, now I'm going to do just Shift, and the period and comma keys are the bracket keys. So Shift comma would be crescendo, and then Shift period is going to be now. Let's say you don't like the endpoints. With this selected, this is an important thing to know, that like Option Alt on Windows is your gateway to moving things around. That's how I think of it. So if I want to move this thing left and right, I'm going to hold Option and I'm going to push R now. Now it's moving to the right. How much? It's moving along the rhythmic grid. So right now I have the rhythmic grid set to eighth notes, so that's how far the crescendo is moving. If I hold Shift while holding Option and use those arrow keys, now I'm going to change the duration of it. Again, according to the rhythmic grid. So if I'm ever in a situation like this where it's like, well, I don't really like where that endpoint is, I might do something like change the rhythmic grid to 16th notes. Boom, boom. Now I'm to 16th notes. And take this thing and make it smaller by 1/16th note.
So, Jake, I got 2 questions for you.
Yeah.
On a PC, is that the control key gets you to Option?
Every time I say Option, think Alt.
Alt. Okay, thanks. And
Yeah.
and so there's no way that you can, like you would in Finale, you can't just grab the end and move it over manually.
No, not in write mode. You can in engrave mode, but should you? It's purely a graphic thing at that point. But yes, in engrave mode, and I think, yeah, I can just take it and move it.
Okay.
But, like, I think that if I did this, and I think that these things that let me change the aperture of it, that might look like the crescendo goes over the whole bar, but it doesn't really.
You mean it wouldn't render on playback?
Right. And you could get into other problems later on. Who knows? So again, that's, I don't know. I don't think I said this, but let me say it now. One of the things, and this is actually, I think, true of Finale as well, less so. It's definitely true of Sibelius. It's something I tell all the Sibelius students. Don't reach out and grab stuff. Learn how the program works before you start grabbing stuff. Same thing with Finale. Learn how you have really powerful positioning things in the expression tool, for example. You can control, horizontal placement really precisely with a lot of different musical points. Start of the time signature, start of the key signature, start of the music, middle of the music, start of the primary note head, left of the primary note head, all those things in finale. Really powerful. Don't just sort of, grab stuff and move it. Learn how those things work. I'm going to read you a quote that Daniel Spreadbury put on the Sibelius blog before he left, before he was fired. Because I think that in a lot of ways this... Sorry, I'm trying to organize my thoughts here. Engrave mode is a little annoying. It's a little annoying that you have to go that far in order to move something around. But now I'm going to read you this quote. Got to find it first. It's on the PDF file that I sent you. Okay. I often wonder whether we were right to make changing vertical staff spacing by dragging the staves up and down so easy. On the one hand, it's very simple and immediate, which is very much in keeping with the way Sibelius is designed. But on the other, it's much easier to discover than the better way to change staff spacing via engraving rules, with the consequence that users may discover how to drag staves around very early in their experience of using Sibelius, but never find the proper way. I imagine there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Sibelius users out there frustrated with the clumsy way that the program appears to handle staff spacing. And then he says, would we make the same decision today? Well, I can tell you that when he had the option of making the same decision, he absolutely did not make the same decision. He made it very, very difficult to change the vertical staff spacing. Because you have to go here into engrave mode and you have to click this thing, which is the vertical spacing thing. It's a pain in the butt. And I think that is very much that experience with Sibelius. Again, this is more important for Sibelius users, but seriously, when you grab stuff in Sibelius, you have broken it. You have broken the connection between the thing you're moving and the default, and it's going to mess you up later on. So rather than having that be the first thing you do, you should learn how the other things work. And then if it's still not quite right, then you can grab it and move it. I think that's less true of Finale, although it is still good advice for Finale users. Definitely true of Dorico here. This crescendo looks fantastic, but you can see here with this dotted line, that's not right. It's probably not going to behave the way I want it to in other situations. Does that make sense, Karen?
Sort of. So.
Sort of. Good.
So leave it alone until you're close.
Leave it alone until later. Yes.
And then if you really want to fuss with it, go to engrave and
right.
Fuss. Okay.
So now, so just get it close, and if it really isn't looking right, then you can mess with it, Right now, I'm noticing that, these things aren't actually grouped. Often, Dorico will try to group dynamics. I'm going to go ahead and explicitly tell it, group these things together, and once I do, now they're going to pop into alignment always.
So that's the same thing as the TG Tools Align Move Dynamics plugin, more or less. Or it does a similar thing.
No, because the TG Tool things just moves them on its own, and then they're not still grouped. So you saw them pop into place, right? But they're also grouped. So if I select this, you can see since it turns blue over here, it's also I'm selecting the whole thing. Gotcha. There are aspects of it where it is truly functioning as a group. Now I think based on this, if I deleted it, it still only deletes the portion that I had selected.
Okay.
But if I were to I think that if I were to move it around, there are definitely things that get affected by. Well, okay, how about this?
So this is more like an Illustrator. When you group things together, then they'll move together.
Watch this. Since now this is a group, remember what I said about Option or Alt being your gateway to moving stuff around. If I want to move these pitches, if I hold Option, Alt on Windows, and use the up and down arrow keys, now I'm moving it down. But what's happening? The hairpins are moving with it. And because they are grouped, it's the entire thing moving. If I were to now, I'm going to right click on this and take it out of the group. And now let's move that note. Only that hairpin moves. If I group them again, now they're together. Let's get this guy out of there. Is that making sense?
Kind of, but you have to explicitly group things for that to happen, or does it happen?
No, a lot of times it will magically do it on its own. I was a little surprised that it didn't that time.
Because when you described this originally, I was wondering if, well, let's say if you've got a couple of staves that are close together, and
Yep.
you add more and more symbols, so that it starts encroaching on the staff
Yep.
below it, will that staff below it automatically move down to accommodate? There is my answer. Thank you very much, and I like that.
These are the Jessica notes.
Yeah. Cool.
Let's what? So yeah, I mean, you just saw I added some articulations, and yeah, everything's just moving out of the way for
All
it.
right. That's kind of Sibelius-ish.
Yep. So, yeah, and let's even. There we go. It knows it's a vocal staff, so it put the crescendo up above.
Oh, it already knows it. Okay. That's awesome.
Let's talk about voices. Let's talk about layers, because somebody had asked about, I think it was, Lori, was it you that was asking about changing layers? I think it was.
Yes, that was me.
So, Finale has 4 layers. If you really want to like push it, each layer has 2 voices. In like 20 years of, I mean, like when I first started learning it, I used some of those voices things. I haven't used it for a long time. I did use it just today because I needed to do this other example that I showed you on the PDF. Sibelius has 4 also. It has 4 voices. They call them voices rather than layers. So, but Finale has 4 voices. Sorry, 4 layers. Dorico has unlimited. Unlimited. They are divided as upstem voices and downstem voices. I say unlimited, that doesn't necessarily mean you should put in like 10 million of these things. But if you're doing like dense polyphonic keyboard work, if you're, like you've decided to, that it's time to re-engrave all of Bach's works, this is a fantastic tool for that. So let me show you how that works. When I go in here to add notes, this symbol here, that quarter note showing up with the stem up, that means upstem voice. There's no other symbol on it. There's no number or anything. So that really means the default upstem voice. So let's go ahead and add some notes. Let's go back here now, and I'm going to add some notes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new voice by doing Shift V. Now the stem has changed to a down stem, and now there's a plus. So I'm going to be adding a down stem voice. By the way, before I do this, let's notice that all these stems are going down because it's the only voice on the staff and it's above the middle line. Therefore, the stems are going down. However, once I start adding notes in this down stem voice, now the stems flip. Now, let's say I want to also add another I don't know. Let's add another upstem voice. So I'm going to hit Shift V. Well, it's default. The first thing it's wanting to add is a new downstem voice. If I do Shift V again, now it's saying +2 and then upstem. So it means add a second voice for upstem. Okay, great. Let's do it. Not sure this was the greatest musical example I could have done, but notice that it has very cleverly separated these things out so that you can see clearly how the voicing is going to work.
Can I see what that would look like with upstem voices underneath the second downstem voice?
Sure, let's do it. We're going to add a third upstem voice. Again, just because you can doesn't mean you should, but here we go.
Look at that. Oh, that's great. Thank you.
And we have now entered the PDQ Bach mode.
It's really confusing to look at the moment. Yeah, so, but I'm going to go ahead and show you the example that I prepared on the PDF. This is from the third movement of the Moonlight Sonata. This is the version, off of IMSLP. And you can see here what's going on is there are 30-second notes down here, and as it's going up, half note, 16th note, half note, dotted 16th note, 30-second. It's just doing this. You can hear with the voices, but it's, and then sustaining, right? So this is it in Dorico, and it uses 4 upstem voices and 1 downstem voices. And after I did this and I was like, ha ha ha, can't do that in Finale, I immediately said, wait, but can I? And the answer is yes, but it is not fun. So I was able to do this in Finale using all 4 layers plus 1 of the voices. So like I did layer 1, voice 1, and 2 to achieve this. I'm pretty sure you couldn't do this in Sibelius, so haha, Avid. It was not fun, but I'm not going to pretend that it was totally fun in Dorico. It still took a while to do, just so you know. But it's possible.
In Behind Bars, I think one of the examples that Elaine Gould gives is just do the 30-second notes, leave them as 30-second notes, and pull the ties over.
Oh, totally. Right. Well, yeah, totally makes sense. I'm not saying this is necessarily the best way to write it, but it's possible. And what you just said about the ties, that's the other thing. Here in the Finale version, these are ties, but they're just graphically moved over. They're not tying anything. In Dorico, right. Let's take this note here and move it down. And if I select these and hit T, it actually will tie them together, even though there are intervening notes and they're in different voices. So John, in the piece, remember what I said in the piece you sent me, which had all those dangling ties that you were using for LVs,
right.
It really tried its best to find something to tie onto. So I was seeing stuff like, I'm going to hit V now. So V without shift toggles between the available voices. So now I'm going back to the primary upstem voice. If I hit T here, will it do it? No, it wouldn't. But like yours was like really trying hard to actually tie to something. Let me show you, since this is something that came up in your piece. If I'm going to call up the bottom panel. That's Command or Control, Karen. 8. There's the bottom panel. Here are a bunch of settings related to the thing that I have selected. So here, I'm going to go here, and here it says Laissez vibrer taille. And there it is. If I don't like the way it looks, how would I go about changing it?
Engrave mode?
No,
but it won't render the same way.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I could go into engrave mode, but let's say I wanted to change all of them. Okay? So I want to change the way that these things look by going into one of the set of options. Which set of options?
Notation?
No. So notation is how it's written. Engraving options is how it looks. So I'm going to go into engraving options. I'm going to look for ties. Well, that wasn't it. Wouldn't it be funny? Maybe it is notation. Like I said, I still don't get it right every time. Let's try. No? I'm pretty sure they're here. Ties on single notes. Da, 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 da. Design. How are they going to avoid collisions? Oh. Minimum length for les vibrer ties, 1.5 spaces. Let's make that 2 spaces. So right now, I should check and make sure that everybody understands spaces. I didn't understand spaces until I started learning Sibelius, even though it's an option in Finale. Space as a unit is the distance between 2 lines on a staff. When I started learning Sibelius, I started realizing how useful it is to use spaces as a measurement, because you always have a ruler on the page in front of you. So I'm going to make this minimum length for LV ties 2 spaces. It was 1.5. Watch what happens here. Let's make it 4. We're just changing that globally. So let's say I want it like 1 3/4. Boom, that's a little bit nicer, right?
And do those spaces map onto the grid?
They're starting here at the center of the note head. So it's not really tied to the current rhythmic grid. It's just how far are you going to draw it? And the answer right now is 1 3/4 spaces.
I guess I'm trying to figure out what constitutes a space.
A space is the distance between lines on a staff.
So are they saying you're going to take that vertical space and you're actually rotating it 90 degrees?
Right. Let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and put this at 1. If I had a ruler like this point to this point, it sure doesn't look like it.
Okay.
But I'm sure it is. Yeah, I mean, imagine now this making a square.
So it is. It's a multiple of the vertical space mapped onto the horizontal space.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. What else? I mean, I haven't showed you slurs. Slurs you do with a couple ways. You can choose the endpoints and hit S for slur. Once you have a slur in, you can also grow it and shrink it in the same way that we did with hairpins. Whoops, now I totally made it disappear. And I can also move it around in the same way. So right now, what is the same way, Jake? Good question, I'm glad you asked. I'm holding down Alt on my Windows computer, Option, and I'm using the arrow keys to move it around, and with Shift, I can grow and shrink it. Oops, I shrank it to nothing. In this case, it's not growing and extending according to the rhythmic grid. It is growing and extending according to the next note in the phrase. So like if this were a half note, then I can't grow and shrink this thing by an eighth note. Can't tie to the tie, or I can't tie to the rest. Does that make sense? More or less. Here's a concept that is difficult to understand. Rests are not objects in the same way that they are in Finale. In Finale, you can go in and you can highlight a rest and you can delete it, and what happens? Everything else scoots over. That's not the way Dorico is thinking about the music. It's really not thinking of the rest as a rest at all. It's thinking of it as, well, there's nothing going on here. Which means that if I delete it, there's still nothing going on there. Where that gets really weird, well, this is weird to begin with. Let me do a more... Let's say I've got a few notes, and then I want to add I said D, but that's okay. Okay, so let's say that I don't want this rest here. So I go in and I'm like, delete, delete, delete. Why won't you leave? What I have to do, and there is a shortcut, but let me show you what the shortcut is actually doing. This note here, Dorico is viewing as not the start of a new voice. Even though that's where I started entering the thing, Dorico is, and I think that there are ways of changing this by default, but out of the box, in this situation where a voice enters partway through the measure, it's going to throw in this rest for it and say that's the start of the voice. So what I need to do is explicitly say this is the start of the voice. So down here on this panel, there are buttons here that say starts voice and ends voice. If I hit starts voice, this now goes back to being only one voice. Therefore, you saw the stems pop back down again because that's the only voice going on right now. And so that rest now is gone. Now, if I take this off, that rest is going to come back. That's a really different way of thinking about rests.
Jake, is there a way that you can hide things the way you hide in Finale? You could have hidden.
No.
The rest.
No. There are certain things that you can hide, and there are certain things that you cannot hide. And rests are something that you cannot hide. You can decide whether they're there or not by saying, oh, well, that's not even part of a voice. There's nothing to show. There is a command that will get rid of, because it can be really annoying to go in and say each thing of these start voice or not. So you can also, let's do this. Let's get rid of that note. I could select this whole measure here and up here under edit, it says remove rests. So now those rests are gone, but sort of under the hood, you do need to understand that what it has done is it went to this note and it toggled this on for me. So there's that rest, and then it went to this note and it said that this note ends this voice immediately. Boom. And as soon as I turn that off, I think that it also has this one. Oh, it didn't. It doesn't have this starting a voice. Apparently that has no effect. So what that remove rests did was it made this the start of the voice and it made this end the voice. So to get the rest back, I need to tell it it is no longer the end of the voice. That's a weird concept to get your head around.
Yeah. So
What do you mean I can't delete the rest? Because the rest doesn't exist. You can't delete something that doesn't exist.
So that would be very similar to the default poll rests in Finale.
Right.
Not to delete default poll rests.
Right.
Even if you made them real whole rests, if you deleted the real whole rest, you'd still have a default whole rest.
If you delete the real whole rest, you get a new default whole rest.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So is there any way in this passage to delete the? I'm using the word delete, so bear with me.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
To not show the half rest, but keep the eighth rest.
Sure.
Would that edit?
I was doing that earlier. If I'm just going to say that this one starts the voice, and now the eighth rest is
using
there.
that other approach that you used.
Oh, I mean, like just with that, if I just have that selected and did remove rests, it'll do that.
Oh,
I could
awesome.
do the
Okay.
same thing by, like, let's do this. This will also get rid of this quarter rest.
Okay. And there's no keyboard shortcut for that?
There sure could be. What do you want it to be, John?
Oh, look at this.
I'm going to let you decide. What do you want it to be?
What happens? if we
Control
do-
S.
Control S?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Real good.
I'm just going to save. Ah!
Real good idea. How about option R? Yeah, oh, yeah.
I'm not going to do that because it's probably.
It's probably already a default.
No, it's probably okay actually, because what it says is this key sequence is also assigned to another command, which it will override when this context press,
Right,
and
right,
that
right.
is
So that's
note
what I
input
would wanna
reply to comment. So like,
That answers my question. Yeah, there's a way to create a command for it.
yeah,
Okay, that's.
I can go in here and like add a comment. Your music sucks. And then I'm coming along here and I'm like, I click on that and I'm like, oh, it says that my music sucks. All right, well, I'm going to reply to that. Maybe it doesn't work. Okay. I thought that would, so that's what alt R is supposed to be, is reply to comment.
Yeah.
But I've never once used that feature, so
Okay.
well, now it doesn't seem
There
to be
is a
working
way
now.
to create a keyboard command for it. And I don't want to rat hole on. I'm sure a lot of us want to get to the lyric stuff.
Oh, lyrics. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah, and I really want to show you some layout stuff too. Yeah. Okay, so lyrics. Here we go. Let's spread some lyrics into our flute part here. Oh, and I still haven't showed you Divisi. There's so much. Like I said, I can't make you all experts in 2 hours. I just can't do it. We're going to add some lyrics to this flute part. How do you think I add lyrics? If I added notes with Shift N, how am I going to add lyrics? Shift L. That's right. This is how you enter lyrics.
You copy lyrics to different voices. instead of having to type it each voice?
You absolutely can. And so one of the things that I have set up keyboard shortcuts to filter certain things out. So let me show you over here. For example, if I go to Edit and I go down here to Filter, these are all sorts of things that I can filter out. And I can either select only these things, or I can select a bunch of things and then deselect things. This is why, John, when Brad wrote, there's no event filter, that is both true and misleading. Because it is true that there's no singular event filter where you can filter everything out. However, there is a very, very powerful filter. And especially since you can actually record macros, you could actually like set stuff up like to filter all sorts of stuff at once. But let's not worry about that. Right now, I'm going to go boom, 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 all dynamics. Boom, and now I have just this dynamics selected. I already have that programmed to be, I have it, this is my custom thing, it's for my computer, control the Windows key, Alt D for dynamics. Boom, there's the filter, boom, now I can delete it. I have the same thing for slurs, all these things plus S, and I have it for lyrics, so all these things plus L. That's not out of the box, that was something I programmed, but now that I have that copied, or sorry, now I have that selected, I could copy it, and I can just go paste. 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 So John, you were asking about clone lyrics, and the thing is there is no comparable thing to clone lyrics. However, you can copy and paste lyrics quite easily. Unfortunately, there are some oddities to this in that it preserves the rhythmic location of the lyrics. So if my sopranos are singing quarter notes, by the way, there is something like scroll view. It's called galley view. I'm going to go ahead and switch to that now. So this is now a continuous stream of music. So I'm right here. If I go here and I filter out these lyrics and then paste them in, it still lets me paste them in at these places. What is weird about that is that if you have music that doesn't quite match, well, let's say for example, you're using Finale and you try to use clone lyrics and you have durations that you have rhythmic stuff that doesn't quite match up. What happens with clone lyrics is those lyrics just won't copy at all, right?
But they'll only copy to the places where
they will copy to the places where there's a one-to-one correspondence,
exactly.
But any place where it doesn't, it won't copy anything.
Yeah, it has to be
Dorico dutifully copies everything over at the rhythmic position they were at, which means that then you might want to, like, if there were, I don't know, you can move this around, is what I'm going to try to say, along the rhythmic grid. So you might find yourself copying, and then to make sure the rhythms match, you grab a syllable and pop it over. But wait, there's more. Let's say you want a verse 2. Okay, so Shift L, that starts the lyrics, okay? Oh, and I didn't show you melismas, that's just space. So like, I'm going to do ta-da, ta, and I will do hyphen, hyphen, da, space, space. Why didn't it add? I don't know why it didn't add a lyric extension. Maybe it's because I'm on flutes and not
I think it's because there's not enough space there.
Sorry, not enough what space?
Not enough space. So if that eighth note just doesn't take up enough space, there's some engravings.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. I think it also might be, on a vocal staff, you're not supposed to have bar lines showing between the staves. So because this is an instrumental part, whoops, that might do it. I'm not sure, but I also think you just might be right that, yeah, it's decided that because this is such a small space, it's not going to bother drawing a
Or
line.
is it partly because we're in galley view?
That could be part of it too. Oh, John,
That was it?
that was it. By the way, there is no automatic support for slurring melismas like the auto slur melismas plugin, which is too bad. I was going to show you though that there is also, like if I wanted to add another verse, I hit down and now second verse. If I have now, so right now I'm on the first verse. I'm going to hold Option or Alt and hit down. And now I have this one with an asterisk. This is for translate ed stuff. So like you have, you know, English and German, English and Latin or something like that. You can put the translated, and this is translated verse 1. You can also, it has support for chorus. It doesn't have section, whatever the heck that means, finale. But there is support for a chorus, and to do that, you get to verse 1 and push up. And now it says C, and that's chorus. But wait, there's more! Because in, like, look at this lovely soprano part I've written. Let's say that this top part has different lyrics. So, like, here's what the people on the bottom are saying. And then the people on top, I think it's shift. Yeah, so shift up arrow, lyrics on the top of the staff. But wait, there's more. There's no built-in lyric window like you're used to. However, what you could do if you're dealing with large texts is you could do something like have it in a Word document. And let's see here. We're gonna steal some text from the MOLA guide, and now I'm gonna go over here to the. Unfortunately, by the way, Dorico will not hyphenate for you. Sibelius actually will. Dorico will not. So I still have to do this. But here, I'm going to copy this stuff. And let's just go right into Dorico first. I'm gonna go into Word and paste it here. But it should still be part of the clipboard. Okay, so now I'm going to Dorico. And I'm going to get rid of all the lyrics here. All right, so now I'm going to go here, and I'm going to start entering lyrics. I still have all of that stuff in my clipboard. Paste. 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 Let's do space, space, paste. Paste. Paste.
So I think this could actually be faster than the click assignment for lyrics in Finale.
Yeah. What it's doing is it's taking what's in the clipboard, it's pasting up to the first hyphen or space, and then it's resaving the clipboard. So if I go back here into Word and paste, you can see that I have pasted in all of this text into Dorico, and this was what was left in the clipboard. But yeah, I think that that's the closest that it has to something like click assignment. But like I said, there's no central place where you can look at all your lyrics. There is, but you won't like it.
Well, the only other thing I was thinking about is, and this happens quite well, not that frequently, but if you accidentally misspell or you accidentally mishyphenate a word and you want it to, and that word appears in multiple voices.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no. So I know what you're getting at. That's the beauty of clone lyric, because you've put it in once, and then you've cloned it, and you realize it's wrong. You go change it, and boom, now it's right everywhere. There's nothing like that.
So there's no centralized way to do that. You have to go into specific instances of that. I mean, it doesn't happen that often, so it's not a big, huge loss.
Yeah, but but it is something that I miss. I like that feature of Finale. But I've also spent way too much time trying to organize that lyric window and make it look nice, and now you don't even worry about that.
Eric, thank you. Eric just mentioned there's also no search and replace.
Lame.
Yep.
That would definitely be a good feature request.
You can do it per line using that the thing you don't want to talk about, because
Yeah, I mean, and what is that called again? It's like, it's not lyric window. It's like
It's like-
line,
yeah, something about line.
lyric, line. No. Yeah. Let me talk about what I just did, though, by the way. And I did mention this on the handout. There's this thing called the jump bar. And it's called up with J. And this has all sorts of things like, I don't know, John, shout out something that you might want to do. Anybody shout out something.
Piano reduction of choral parts.
Oh. Reduce. I think, though, that honestly, I think that what this particular reduce is not what we're looking for. I think that it is actually... Oh. No, I don't know what the heck that was. I'm gonna have to look that up. What you're talking about, there are options for copying and then sort of paste special reduce. So there are options for that sort of thing, for doing piano reductions. The jump bar is a great way of there's just so much stuff here. Diminuendo, maybe? No, not that. Clearly, this is not a great example. It's a way of accessing all sorts of things. So, like, if I wanted to filter out lyrics and I couldn't remember where the heck it was over here, and I couldn't remember my keyboard shortcut, I could say, jump bar. How about this? Filter. So I started writing filter lit, and now it's showing up. Filter all lyrics. And it also shows me what my keyboard shortcut was. Boom. Now it's done. Let's say I didn't have a keyboard shortcut for filtering notes. Filter notes and chords. Boom. Now it's just the notes and chords. So J for the jump bar. And you just type in what you want to do and it will show you all sorts of stuff. Very, very handy.
So just
Okay,
J by itself.
that's kind of like a quick user manual sort of
Yeah.
thing. Okay.
Yeah. I'm looking at the time. I want to show you this layout stuff in engrave mode. So I'm going to engrave mode. Oh, and I didn't show you this, but the quick way of moving between modes. So I showed you the panels, which is Command or Control 7, 8, 9, and then 0 will toggle between like setups, okay? So you're probably going, well, that leaves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Jake, and you'd be right. Command or Control 6 shows and hides this little top thing, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Command or Control 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will move between the 5 modes. So Command or Control 1 for setup, 2 for write, 3 for engrave, etc. So here we are in engrave mode. Over here, these are like, I don't know what to call them, sub modes of working in engrave mode. This thing with the note and the handle, this is the hardcore, like, well, how do I, change the appearance of this note? That's here. The other thing that is here is that this is where you can do some basic, like, reorganizing of the way your music is laid out. So I have things here for move to previous system and move to next system. Shortcuts for these are the comma and period keys. So if I hit period, that moves it to the next system. What it has done is it has inserted a system break. So now if I wanted to undo that, well, I could do comma, but that's not quite the same thing because it's still, since I've manually moved it, it still has these system breaks, which means that it's broken. Okay, so if I really want to get rid of those system breaks, restore it to its pristine natural state, I would have to get rid of these system breaks. Now, ready for this? Let's see if it does it. Here we go. Yes! This is a very Dorico problem. If you ever see this working with Dorico, where it tries to put everything all on the same page, that is because you have a system break without another system break. And the system break command signpost tells it to look for another one. And so since there's only one, it doesn't know what to do and the world ends. So to get rid of this, I need to get rid of all of the system breaks, and now it's good. But if you ever see that particular problem going on, that's what's happening. What am I trying to do? Okay, so I can also, though, I have options for, if I select this, and let's go select this last note of this measure here, and I can say make this into a single frame, except I haven't talked about music frames yet. Still, if I do that, boom, now it tries to fit it all on. It's having trouble making it happen, but it did it. You can also select this and say, make that all part of the same system. It's still going to complain. Now, notice this. At the end of this system is this little green frame, and it tells you how full of stuff the system is. 78.3%. This system is 116%. You can see that it is having trouble making it look good because it's too full. The page itself, 93.8%. If on the other hand, there isn't hardly anything on the system, then it is coded purple. So purple means, there's plenty more room here. Green is like, ooh, nice job. And then red is like, are you sure you want to do that? Sometimes you might. Letting it get 116% full is never looks good. This thing is the frame editor, and I'm going to show you how this works. And I know I said 2 hours. Stick with me for just a few more minutes. I can take this, and this is a text frame, so I can take this and then I can start typing some stuff in here. I could go here and add a new music frame and tell it that I only want to see the flute 1 part right there. So right in the middle of all this other stuff, there's a little flute 1 part for flow 3. Let's make it for flow, there we go, flow 1. this is a graphic frame, so I can, I think that if I hit, yeah. It's not finding any JPEGs, huh? There we go. So that's how you can add graphics to your score. This is actually a screen icon, which is why Now, notice though over here that this little red frame, that means that I have overridden the default look of that page. So I can reset it by saying remove all page overrides. Now, what I really want to show you is over here. This is another one of those things where it's like there's no real analogous thing in Finale to this thing. This is a very much a concept that comes from like desktop publishing software. These are my page templates. These are happen to be the page templates for the full score. The first one, there are two halves, one for left-hand pages and one for right-hand pages. The blue frames, this is my music frame. So you can see here that this is don't worry about this, but this is a frame chain, and then it says all flows, all players. That's the full score. And then these are called tokens. They're all done by the curly brackets and then an @ symbol and then whatever the text of the token is. In this case, it's the project title, project composer, project lyricist. Down here we have project copyright. Up here we have buttons to copy the stuff from the left onto the stuff on the right. This is how you control the header information, the catalog information, and how that appears on the score. So that is for the first page. This is for all other pages. You can see in this case, we have a very simple project title at the top and then page numbers on the left and right. And if I wanted to change that, I don't know, let's just add, I don't know why it's jumping around with the zoom, sorry. Blah, 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 blah. It changed both sides here. I'm going to hit apply and close. And now all of my pages are going to have that blah, blah, blah on it. And one of the beautiful things about Dorico is if I go to the parts, it has a completely different set of these page templates. So I can, this is actually really important for the stuff that we do in the film scoring program, where we actually call for very different information to be presented at the top of the score versus the parts. And both in Finale and Sibelius, you had to go through all this torturous stuff about hiding text here and there. And in Dorico, you just set it up as a separate page template and use one for your score, one for your parts, and it just all comes out beautifully and can be saved all in one place. So this is one of those areas that like, this took a lot of experimentation on my part to like really get my brain around it, because there's nothing quite like it in Finale. So that would be one of those areas that I would recommend you explore and spend some time with. All right, folks, we're over 2 hours now. Like I said, it was a fool's errand to think that I could make anybody an expert in this time, but like I really tried to, like I said, show these are the things that trip me up. These are the things that I wish I had known. I wish I had known about that jump bar. I wish I'd known about page templates and how they worked. I am totally willing to do some one-on-one sessions if people need that, or do another session later on. But as you're going on this journey, go ahead and reach out to me, and I'd be happy to answer more questions.
Thank you for an
Thank you
excellent intro.
so much. Can you pop in the chat? Can you pop your Venmo so we can send
Yes,
something?
sure. I actually have it as part of my name. It is at Jacob Winkler 10.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is fabulous. Really helpful.
I will also send you. Does everybody else also want that MOLA document, or just Karen?
Oh,
I'll just send it to
love
Karen.
have it.
Okay, I'll send it to you, John, and then you can also send it to your students.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And
I
I
would
might.
like it.
Oh, go ahead.
I say I would like it. This is Brian Stratton.
Let's do this. I'm going to do right now in the chat. I am going to. This is actually the one we want. Copy link address. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat right now.
Cool.
That wasn't quite it. Hold on. I'm almost there. Okay, this was the same link that there was before. Okay. That's still available through that page that I sent earlier, but that's the actual one.
And Jake, this was fantastic. Thank you again so much. I might poll my students and just say, hey, y'all, get your questions together, and maybe we can do a Q&A session.
Yeah,
Just with
absolutely.
a limited number of people. That way, I mean, this was limited tonight too, but if you would be willing to do that, I think hopefully, we would find that helpful as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording right now.